Welcome to Yesterday, Today, Tomorrow. My name is Mariana Cordier, and I am your host. Whether you believe in global warming, climate change, or it's all a hoax, we can all agree to the importance of using science to ensure the Earth's resources match the population's demands. Sustainability policies and technology allows for the needs of today to be met without jeopardizing the needs of future generations. Joining me today to discuss the broad topic of the environment and sustainability are Jen Bristol, Director of Communications for the Solar, sorry about that, SEIA, it's the Solar Environmental Industries Association. Andrew Fellows, he's Faculty Research Specialist at the University of Maryland. And Jose Luis Izursa, he's a Lector and Professor at the Environmental Science and Technologies Department at the University of Maryland as well. Thank you. Sorry, that was a mouthful that I messed up on the name of your trade association, Jen. But thank you for being here. And it's such an important topic. Everyone wants to talk about whether climate change or global warming is a myth or if it's a fact. But my perspective on this is that we got to do something to maintain our resources so that they're there for our kids. Do you agree?
I definitely agree, and thank you so much for having me. I do work at the Solar Energy Industries Association, SEIA.
Got it right?
Got it. Yes, and solar energy is booming. I mean, prices have dropped over 70% in the last decade, and solar energy is an American success story. We now have more than 2 million solar installations across the country, and more than 250,000 people work in the industry. It's really exciting, but we have so much more growing that needs to happen. At SEIA, we have a big, bold goal for solar to get to 20% of U.S. electricity generation by 2030.
That's just in 10 years.
Just in 10 years, but we need the workforce behind it. We need to grow to 600,000 professionals in order to sustain that. But if we do that, we can add $345 billion, billion with a B, to the economy.
That's amazing. You know what I like about what you're talking about and something, because I'm a bit of a history buff, is after World War II, the air conditioning and heating industry just rocketed, and so many people, mom and pop shops and across the country, not only installed it, maintained it, and as of today, I mean, last summer my air conditioning, went on the fritz, and the first call was like, "Can you please come?" And I'm thinking that solar is going to be the same way for anyone who wants to explore, opening a small business or working for a business in solar.
Yeah, I think that's a really good corollary. I mean, just think about all the HVAC professionals that you see around today, plumbing and heating, cars and vans left and right. Solar is going to be similar. I mean, your installation can last for 20 to 30 years, but you still need people that are going to maintain those systems. I mean, and then of course you have, it's a huge growing industry. I mean, you have marketing and communications professionals like myself, but you also have project management, engineering and procurement. And then of course, thinking about the grid and how we modernize the grid, we're going to need professionals that learn how to use those digital tools as well.
But I'm sure there's some naysayers on solar, isn't there?
There are naysayers everywhere. What I will say is that solar is here and now. It is not something of the future. It's something that we are doing today.
Right.
Well, and solar is such an amazing, historic the fact that people have used the sun to heat and warm things forever. And so solar energy's been around for a long time, for as long as our planet's been around.
And it's not a limited resource.
It's not a limited resource, and it's clean. And it's and so I think the idea of it doesn't even matter, the fact that climate change is real and exists. Even if it didn't exist, solar energy would make sense. The idea of extracting fossil fuels from our planet, the cost and also the pollution and the harmful health effects of fossil fuels alone would be enough to push for sustainability purposes to go to solar as a primary way of generating energy. And the other things, coupled with other things like fuel cells and other geothermal and other kinds of clean energy, there's all sorts of ways including wind energy, which is a form of solar energy, that we can really generate clean energy to supply all of our energy needs and create jobs at the same time.
I love the idea of the topic of jobs because when you talk about fossil fuel issues, a lot of it is the individuals in those communities who are scared of losing jobs, and yet here they may not only get work, but work that isn't as negative for their health.
Right. When you think about all the lung deaths and how horrible the conditions were for coal miners for decades and even centuries, the fact that we now no longer really need to rely on coal is a really positive thing. The tragedy and in some ways the scandal is that we haven't done more to help with the transition of mining country areas to do work transition, because there's plenty of jobs in that part of the world as well, but people have been pushing to hold on to profits really for the wealthy people around coal, whereas the workers really suffered.
Yes, and it's
continue to.
I was going to say, I couldn't agree more, and we can't forget about communities of color that have been disproportionately disadvantaged by incumbent generators like coal and others. And solar energy really does represent an opportunity for people to not only get a job but to also start their own business. The vast majority of businesses in the industry are small businesses with 50 people or less, and so there really is the opportunity to not only power the entire country with clean renewable energy like solar energy, but to also benefit and to boost the economy as well.
And I think, the other thing that your association does that is so important for the consumers, the audience that's watching us going, I would love solar panels, but which ones do I get? How do I figure it out? You have information that is provided to consumers on, what are the important questions to ask.
Absolutely. If consumers want to, go and visit SEIA.org, we have a ton of resources and guides that are up there, as well as the Department of Energy, that really help consumers ask the right questions. Is solar right for me? Is my rooftop, facing in a way that benefits the sun? And if I, don't own my own home, there are so many other ways that you can go solar. Community solar being one of them.
I love that. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about
Sure.
community solar?
Yes. So community solar is essentially, let's say you have a solar facility, a solar farm that's off-site, and you can't go solar because you rent your home or your rooftop it's not working. You can subscribe to that solar facility, whether you own panels or shares within the facility. You can benefit through credits on your bill.
That's awesome.
Well, and my wife and I, actually the entire city of College Park, that is the city itself, all of the energy is generated by wind, because you are able to get into programs where you're basically supplying your own energy. It may not be a wind farm on your property, but it's you're buying it off the grid. So one of the things that's really available with technology today is you're able to shop for really both good bargains, but also clean energy to supply your home.
That's amazing. And I like the idea of maybe in your work, in your line of work, that you guys would probably be able to also use that, because we're talking about solar, but we also need to talk about growing our food and having resources, that is a little bit different than what's traditionally done, right?
Yes. One of the other challenges that climate change brings is food production. Things are changing, and we definitely would like to couple food production with use of technology. And also, I'm curious to see what is the status of the storage of solar energy at this time, because solar photovoltaic cells are well developed now, but about the storage, we would like to use, for example, I work with aquaponic systems in
so
University
what are
of Maryland.
aquaponics?
Yes, aquaponic systems are a marriage between hydroponics, which is a soilless food production systems, and aquaculture, growing food in a recirculating system. But it could be off the grid, but we have been trying to test small systems using batteries. But when you want to go big, in a big farm, the batteries are not there yet. Do you have any ideas what is going on the batteries
or the development
Sure.
of
I
batteries?
mean, I'll tell you that energy storage prices are coming down rapidly. Just as solar is getting to be more and more affordable, energy storage is following right behind it. And so while, you might not be able to get to scale just yet, I mean, there are people that, today who have, they thought about solar 2 or 3 years ago. What I'd say to, the average viewers, if you considered it 2 or 3 years ago and it wasn't right for you, definitely take a look at it again. And I'd say the same with energy storage.
So energy storage is what? It's like a battery or a generator that you can then have the power into your home or whatever.
Right. Right, and so solar obviously doesn't produce electricity for your home or your business at night, and so storage or energy storage through batteries is a great option for your home or business. It allows you to still use solar energy at night when your system isn't producing.
All right, and so and what I thought was really interesting, something you said is growing food without the soil. You can do that?
Yes, you can do that. It has been done for a long time, and it's really an alternative for people that doesn't have a good quality of soil, for example, or doesn't have a big piece of land. It's very compact and highly productive.
And it makes me think of, why we don't need to slash and burn the Amazon jungle in Brazil, or with Australia being on fire, they still on fire.
Yeah, exactly.
How are they going to recoup?
Or even in places like the Washington D.C. area where the land is very expensive and we cannot use farming in a traditional way. So this is something very compact and highly sustainable. They use 10% of water compared to traditional farming. And it's ideal also for places where the soil is really poor, like desertic areas in desert areas,
arid places.
That's right, and we have a project going on in Mexico, for example, and that's where we want to use the solar energy, get off the grid completely, grid, but we were concerned about the batteries. But anyway, it's a sustainable recirculating, self-sustaining system that we are encouraging people to use.
The fact that you're having the conversation and working at the thought process of making those batteries and the storage better is amazing, because with the way that technology rapidly evolves, that's a solution that seems to be right around the corner, right?
Yes.
Now, and this raises a little bit of a question about environmental justice. That's a conversation that I think it goes hand in hand with what we're talking about.
Yeah, so one of the things that I've done in the past, I've been the vice chair of the Maryland Commission on Environmental Justice and Sustainable Communities. That was created during the Glendenning administration to address Maryland's environmental justice, to make us to be the most just environmental state in the country.
What does that mean? Like when you say that, what do you, as a lawyer, justice I'm thinking in courts?
I'd say justice and environmental justice context is that communities of color disproportionately, but certain people have a disproportionate burden of toxic releases, permits for power plants, waste landfills, the kinds of things that get permitted and get used for communities in general, but they get cited in areas or a chemical facility where there's toxics that are released. Those areas get cited with the people with the least political power to fight those, and so they're the people with the least amount of money, and it's disproportionately people of color. So for the state of Maryland, where Baltimore City would probably, and South Baltimore in particular in Baltimore City, has by far the preponderance of the waste energy facilities, which we should really call incinerators, and also the dumps and the places that people don't want to be associated with. Those communities, the importance of fighting those like additionally proposed facilities, because once you get some in, everybody starts moving to them, and so you have a lot of things congregated in one area. Whereas other communities don't really have any kinds of significant toxic burdens. And so the idea of environmental justice is that we should all share equally in sort of the burdens of environmental impacts of certain things that we do for communities. Some things shouldn't be on planet Earth. There's some things that we should just not do. Fossil fuels is increasingly one of those things because of the fact of greenhouse gas emissions and the existential threat of climate change.
So what do we do though? Because I know that everyone hates the idea of a dump or an incinerator or anything around
Right.
their neighborhood, but at the end of the day, we generate so much trash.
Right. Well, so there's two sides of it. One is reducing the amount of trash that you're generating in the first place. But if you are managing your waste facilities, there's ways to do a waste facility that is really resourcing the materials from it and reusing them to the maximum extent possible.
So we're talking about recycling.
Reduce, reduction, and reuse. So it's all three R's. So it's not just recycling.
Say it again?
It's recycling, reducing, and reusing. And so all three of those are really important. And maybe the most important thing is reducing. So on the front end, we don't need all this plastic packaging that we put into sort of all the shipping materials. We don't, now in the days of e-trade and email, we're shipping all sorts of things, and we really need to figure out sustainable packaging.
Yeah, and you might be surprised to hear that actually the solar industry is thinking a lot about recycling. We have our own program where we have five facilities that are part of this program, and then there's one other that has others all across the country where, you know, your panels can live for 25, 30 years in the field, but, there might be one or two that, expire or don't work properly, or, in 20 to 30 years when, solar systems are coming offline, they can go to one of those facilities and recycle the panels and reuse them.
Right.
That's awesome. That's all about the sustainability, right?
Yes.
When we're still a major of College Park, I have a capstone group, and we work in the zero waste project. How's going on the zero waste?
Well, so I was the mayor of College Park from 2009 to 2015, and during those 6 years, one of the things that I worked to do is to increase the collaboration between the university and the city. There's so much resources at the university, particularly intellectual resources, to think about ways we can do things differently and better for communities. So we did programs with a program called the PALS program, and it stands for Partnerships for Active Learning and Sustainability, and it's run by the National Center for Smart Growth. So one of the projects was around zero waste and how could we reduce the amount of waste that we were creating in the city of College Park. That project ended after a certain period of time, but it's one of those pilots that we want to keep looking at different things.
You want to do it again and
and
expand
also,
it.
Yeah, because sometimes things may work in the short term, but they may not
In the
be
long
sustainable.
term,
So
right.
one of the issues of sustainability is how
Right.
can we do things in the long term?
Right.
Because sometimes you can do things for a short period of time, but you can't keep them up.
Right.
So one of the things that we want to do is, in terms of financing, and one of the things that solar is so powerful for is that once you have the solar grid up, the sun's not going away.
Right.
Well, if the sun does
getting
go away,
brighter.
we're all done. Right.
And another important part of the waste is food.
Food.
So a lot of the food produced unfortunately goes to waste, around 30
wasted,
to
right.
40%. It goes to waste and also goes to the landfill, which is getting full. So probably we need to educate ourselves in just
How to recycle food.
or using the food that we buy.
Well, and one of the great things that the College of Agricultural and Natural Resources, which is one of the colleges that make up the University of Maryland College Park, is developing an agroecology corridor to both talk about the positive impacts of agriculture, but also just developing ecosystems both locally and also even globally that are sustainable. It's producing food. 73% of Prince George's County is zoned for agriculture. And it's not known as an agricultural county.
No, yes.
But there's a lot of it that can be done with urban agriculture. And we've got some really great urban farms like Eco City Farms.
That's
and
great.
The university has a farm called Terp Farm that uses compost from the dining services food waste.
Well, and one thing that you said to me was that in Maryland, there's somewhere they have an 11-acre farm that's going to be a non-soil. So it's going to be this water farm, I guess, or how do you call it?
It's a hydroponic.
Hydroponic.
Yes, and it's very important. And another factor, we don't want to use fossil fuels.
Right.
We talk about food miles. So
Food what?
Miles.
Miles.
So food is coming from everywhere.
Right.
We have in this globalized world that if you want grapes in non-season, you can easily
still
buy
get them, yeah.
because they come from Argentina or
Yes.
Chile, right? But then if we produce locally and it's cheaper. We don't have to transport the food, and
I
that's
imagine
very important.
are these farms enclosed? Are they
greenhouses?
the greenhouses? So you could grow anything
or-
you want in the wintertime.
Yeah.
So
all
you're
year
not
round.
limited.
That's true. Yeah,
That's
and we
amazing.
can use solar for that.
Right. There's also a natural pairing between solar and farming. I mean, you can have a solar field that powers a farm, but also farmers are beginning to lease their land for
Right.
solar projects as well. And so you're seeing farmers that are supplementing their income with solar.
That's great because farmers do need, when they have a good season, it's okay, but when you have a bad season, you really need that additional help.
Yes.
And
Should
so-
we concern that the solar farms are going to replace the food farms?
No, I think they can coexist, if you will. But then what's interesting is that there's this misperception that, you know, you need all of this land, all of this space for solar. And that's just, it's simply not true. The National Renewable Energy Laboratory, NREL, they've done studies on this. And if you wanted to power the entire United States with solar energy, you would only need 0.6% of U.S. land area to do it. And so,
wow.
yeah, it's just a complete misnomer.
Right.
Well, and co-benefits is a really important part of how we manage our way through the transition to a really clean energy future. Things like where farms may not be viable on their own, if they do part of their land for solar, if they do sort of rotating land use, there's lots of different things you can do to both make your soil healthier, which actually and actually just sort of the tourist aspect of agriculture, because of the fact that people really value sort of rural settings. As a matter of fact, people will sell ex-urban suburban communities as like in a rural setting,
Right.
and because they're selling the farm lifestyle, and meanwhile the farmers around there are like saying, well, don't stop changing our lifestyle. Mm-hmm. So I think that one of the things that as our population grows is to make sure that the population grows in the right places.
Right.
That we really develop density around metro stations and transit use places so that we're less auto dependent, which is another way of reducing fossil fuels, is by reducing the need to drive all over the place. Of course, we have electric cars coming, but there's also still the polar. So at some point we'll have electric cars that are solar.
Yeah, they won't need charging stations. You're just on the roof instead of a sunroof, you've got a solar panel.
I mean, but then when you think about the electrification of the entire, transportation industry, I mean, you will have electric vehicle charging stations across the country that can be solar powered as well for, big trucks, or it could be, let's say you're doing a long road trip with your electric vehicle. I mean, that's definitely right around the corner.
Or maybe even think about rail that's electric.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the Purple Line, which is coming through the University
Sure.
of Maryland and connecting Bethesda to New Carrollton, it's going to revitalize a lot of the communities along there. And one of the things that's exciting about it is it's a very clean way of transporting people, and it's mass transit, which is a much cleaner way than everybody getting in their own car.
Why is the Purple Line going to be different from the other? Is it going to be different from the other lines, or is it going to be the same?
Well, it's light rail, so it's above ground, so it's not underground like the metro.
Right.
But it's light rail in general is less expensive than heavy rail that has the metro stations.
No, that's good.
But it also has the advantages of transit-oriented development. So all along the corridor, it'll be attractive to be living in these places where you can just hop on a trolley or on a rail and get to where you're going without having to drive.
I have to admit that I do like European transit model because I got all over, barely ever got in a car unless it was a taxi late at night.
Yeah, it's really nice.
I don't know what I'm admitting, but well, so in the last 30 seconds, we don't want to know what I've been doing while I was in Europe. What would you guys want to share with the audience to let them know about energy and sustainability?
Well, the other thing I wanted to point out was that with climate change, some of the most vulnerable communities are the ones with the least amount of money. And so communities that are most prone to flooding, where flooding picks up in coastal areas, tend to be lower income areas. And so
we got to help them out.
But it's also important to help all of us out. It's not just doing it for them, it's doing it for us.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much. We can be seen on YTT YouTube channel, and please check us out yesterday, today, tomorrow on Facebook and Instagram. I would like to thank our guests for joining me and the audience for watching, and invite all of you to join me next week at the same time. I'm Mariana Cordier.